Hey guys, welcome to Emergent Leadership. My name is Brett Lyle, and I am fortunate enough to be with Assistant Fire Chief, City of Maricopa, Fire and Medical, Brad Pitassi. Brad, thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'm kind of excited. Brad, you're my first fire guy on the show.
There we go. I'm going to set the bar low, so we'll be good. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to have you. So tell us a little bit, you know what the show's about. So we really are just here to talk about leadership in general. And so my intention with the show, as I shared with listeners in the past, is to talk through not just concepts, but really share stories and open up about how leadership has looked and felt for you. This is going to be more of a discussion. So I'll jump in and then talk about some things, but give our audience a little bit of background on you, Brad, if you don't mind. How
Sure.
your path to leadership?
Okay, yeah, great. So I'm originally from New England, born and raised Providence, Rhode Island, moved out to Arizona when I was living in Boston, and started working on the private ambulance back in 2002, and transitioned my way through being an EMT in the ambulance, and then I started testing for fire departments. I got hired here about 14 years ago, and I've kind of raised through the ranks of being assistant chief on various different career paths through the fire service, and it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, I'm sure. So it's funny because you're in Arizona, but you're actually from the Northeast, right?
I am. Yep. So I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and then I was living in Boston when I moved out to Arizona. So
yeah,
still a New England sports fan and still have a lot of New England blood in me. So
yeah.
Can't shovel the sunshine in Arizona. So that's what's keeping me out here. Yeah.
That's true. That's very true. Every place in this country has its ups and downs. So
It does.
I personally love Arizona. But so you have kind of an atypical path. I mean, when you talk about your fire career, and you've I think been promoted pretty quickly, and you've been in that role for about how long? About 6 months now, Brad, is that right?
Yeah, about there. I got promoted. If it was officially, I was acting for a while, and it was official promotion in March. So.
Awesome. So before that, what were you doing with it? You were in a PIO role.
I was. So I've actually had a few roles in the department, but when I was a firefighter, a few years on the job really, which is kind of rare as well, my chief pulled me into his office one day and says, "Hey, Pitassi, you like to talk? You're going to be our PIO." And I had no idea what that entailed.
Right.
You know, in the Phoenix area, there's been a few famous fire service PIOs. So I've seen them on TV from time to time, but it never really registered. And I was so focused on being a good firefighter and, you know, dedicated to learning my craft that I kind of got side hooked into that. And so I started as the fire department PIO back in 2008, and then has progressed through that career. So after, you know, going to some of the classes and trainings, I just fell in love with it. Mm-hmm. And it really helped me develop my communication skills, which I can directly contribute to evolving as a leader and honing the leadership skills. Because as we know, leadership's all about relationships and communication. So being a PIO kind of forces you to really fine tune and have instant feedback when you're messaging with the community that you're working in. So I was the PIO for a while. I still stayed on the truck as a firefighter paramedic, and I was always a secondary assignment. And then as I worked my career through being a captain and then a battalion chief and a deputy chief, that was always my second task. I was always the department PIO, and recently in my promotion, I'm now the assistant chief over administrative services. So I oversee community services, logistics, and fire prevention, and what I refer to as the kitchen sink. So whatever my chief's crazy ideas, he comes running down the hallway big-eyed, and my job is to implement those ideas or tactfully say no. And then now I've actually transitioned out of the formal PIO role, and I act more as an advisor to our deputy chief of community services that's taking that role on and doing a great job with it.
That's awesome. So PIO, for those who don't know, is the public information officer. I think most of our listeners are you know, EMS, fire, healthcare background, but I know not every department is fortunate enough to have a dedicated, you know, public relations, information, you know, business development, even kind of role. So fortunate that your department I mean, not only had you, but had the role in general. So I want to dive into that a little bit. Tell me about, how did you get identified as a public information officer in the beginning? Where does that even come from?
So, you know, a lot of it came from a gut intuition from my chief at the time. And he didn't realize he opened Pandora's box, because I'm a talker by nature. I'm, you know, a New England Italian guy who loves family, loves community, loves to talk. Everybody in the firehouse used to joke that I could have a 2-hour conversation with The Rock, and The Rock and myself would be satisfied when I left.
I've never heard that.
Yeah,
So
you know,
I can't relate.
yeah. And so it's, you know, I have that character trait in me that I just love people. I think a lot of us in the EMS world, in the medical world, pre-hospital, we have to be in for the people, the communities that we're serving.
Mm-hmm.
And so originally, I think it was just kind of like, you're going to be a guy that talks to the media. And it really transitioned to as I learned more and more and kind of unraveled everything that was beyond the surface of being a public information officer, what it means to be embedded in your community and to build those relationships. And I talk about building social equity. So that good graces of getting out in front of positive messages, of pointing successes back to the community, of, you know, these folks followed the rules, they checked their smoke detectors, they escaped the house and they lived, or this person was saved because these people took the hands-only CPR class 2 months ago and now they enacted life-saving CPR in Fry's Marketplace to save this individual's life.
Sure.
And so that social equity really was what all of a sudden was starting to turn heads, both internally within the department. I went from, hey, why is this firefighter the public information officer? I don't trust this guy. He's new. What does he know? To all of a sudden going, hey, wait a minute. We're all of a sudden getting more grants and we're getting budget increases, and the city council is talking about how, you know, what a great job we're doing in the community. And all right, Brad, keep going. And it kind of just snowballed. And fortunately, I've had great leadership above me that is just kind of opened the floodgates to allowing me to have these crazy ideas and run. And that's the leader I'm trying to be for the deputy chief doing it now.
I love that. So when you say social equity, dive a little bit further into that. So I know you're talking about building the good stuff, kind of planting the seeds, telling them about all the great things you do as a department, how the community works together. What's the equity part of the social equity?
So, you know, how I describe it to the PIOs and the classes that I teach is, you have to think of your social equity as a bank account. And so every time you get ahead of a good story, every time you give credit back to the community for being engaged in hands-only CPR or any of the other programs that we're offering, you're making deposits into that checking account.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it'd be very naive for us to think that there's never going to be an issue within any fire, EMS, or hospital environment.
Right.
That's not going to happen. As long as we have human beings in these roles, bad days are going to come, and we're going to have to be able to shoulder those and move on. And I look at those as withdrawals of our equity. So for every 10 good jobs we're doing, we're going to have 1 or 2 knuckleheads out there doing something that is going to be detrimental to our brand and our reputation. However, if you don't build that bank of equity, if you don't build those 100 good stories, if you don't make the connections to the community, when you're depositing and you're withdrawing 2, that's a very small impact. If you're not doing it and you're depositing 2 from 0, you're now negative.
Right.
And that is reputation management. That takes a lot more than 2 more good stories to get out there to cause it equal. You're going to have to be digging out of a hole. And our goal is to educate our community, provide them the skills they need to be successful in their own lives, and build that equity, build that bank account. So if something bad does happen, which it will, we are sitting pretty. My goal is to have a community member pick up the paper with a bad headline and say, hey, that's not the fire department that we know.
Right. And that's a huge thing. So you hit on a few pieces. One, it's with the community, but it's also building that value add and showing your elected officials, your stakeholders, your community. So, and whether that community is a board, whether that community is a hospital or a hospital board, or your regional, trauma advisory, or your incident management team, whomever that is, building that reputation is what gets you from, they're a fire department, to they're an incredible fire department, and those adjectives that come before being positive. And so the goal, as I'm hearing it, is build that proactively. And I think, Brad, that doesn't come naturally to everybody, especially in our industry. It feels very unnatural. People, they wonder, like, does it sound braggy? Does it sound, do I sound egotistical or arrogant? Or am I going to come off as a narcissist? I mean, and people are kind of afraid to speak positively. So I'm curious, have you experienced that same kind of pushback where people aren't necessarily embracing it from the beginning?
Oh, 100%. And that was one of the big challenges that we have, is that the people that are driven, I believe, into healthcare are not about themselves, because they are dedicating their lives for the benefit of their community and for others. And so to then stick a camera in front of them or ask them to, tell us about yourself, they feel exactly that. It's almost like it's a threat to their ego, because they don't want to be a narcissist. They don't want to be, that person on TV that is, trying to just be all about themselves. And so, yeah, I've dealt with that throughout my career. And ultimately, some of the tactics I use to get around that, especially if there's a story that is developing in a firehouse or involves a rescue or whatnot, is I say, hey, listen, it's not about you, but wouldn't it be really cool if your children see you on TV and have something to be very proud about? And so I turn it about them. I turn it about the community. I say, hey, yeah, I get it. You don't want to be egotistical and narcissistic. Nobody does. However, wouldn't it be really cool if this video is shown at the city council meeting when we're trying to ask for new Lucas devices, which is the automatic chest compression devices to aid us in CPR, because we have a half-hour, commute to our local trauma center?
Right.
Wouldn't that help you? And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, that'd be great. Let's talk about that.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden you start, it goes back to the why. And it says, this isn't about your face on the camera. You're going to have to buy ice cream, get over it. However, there's a bigger picture here. You're now vested into a bigger plan that we can execute, because you're going to dedicate your time to standing in front of a community of potential voters, or a city council, or even a classroom full of children trying to figure out why it's important to stop, drop, and roll. Right. You invest in the children, you invest in the community, their parents hear about it, and you're building that equity.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's incredible. And one of my experiences, I was communication major in college, and I kind of have a similar path to you. I've kind of quote unquote played PIO, right?
Sure.
Then with the media. And that's something that I felt too, is I don't want to be on the camera. I don't like the camera. I don't like, and so I think it's finding what you just hit on, finding what resonates with people. Why is it important to you? And being part of that bigger brand is something that people can get behind in this industry. They understand that this isn't about me. And so I think it's about, that's how you get people to engage and have the conversation.
Absolutely.
But I think it's also really important to note that there's a reason you want that person to be on the camera and not you, right, Brad? Or
Absolutely.
So how do you navigate that? Like, have you had that same experience that I have, where it's, I could say this and I could do it, but it's not going to come across the same than if you do it?
Oh, absolutely. And as I've transitioned my career as PIO, I found myself pulling away from the camera work. One of the other jobs I have is I'm one of the lead public information officers from one of the national Type 1 incident management teams. And there's one of 16 teams across the nation that do incident stabilization, floods, the aftermath of really any large or complex incident in the country. And we come before FEMA arrives to deal with the recovery efforts. Okay. However, I am hardly on camera or TV now, because I'm much more in that strategic element. And a lot of when I started really pulling back was because they don't want to hear from me all the time. I want my subject matter experts. If I have a story on the new latest and greatest technique for CPR or, advanced life support widget, I want my most articulate paramedic talking about that, because I want them, to have ownership in it, and that is a huge component of being successful in this. Is you want the people that have a lot of ownership, a lot of passion, and are the subject matter experts in that area, being able to do that and articulate that. And I always told them, I'm your fallback. Can I do the interview? I can, absolutely. Is it better if I get a vast majority of the people in the department to stand up in front of the camera? 100%, because they're now making it personal. I am not the fire medical department, and I don't want to be the fire medical department. I want the members of my department to be the department. And so the community sees more than just Brad talking about X, Y, and Z. They want to see as many people as we can, because now we're going to make it personal, because there may be somebody in the community that could resonate with that individual that's talking, and we need that connection. Again, just another way to build that social equity in the community.
Right. Nail on the head. And I love that analogy. I think it's a really great one because your bank account is the entire bank account, right?
It is.
You can have a checking account and your checking account looks great, but your savings account is completely diminished, then you're not sitting in the same situation, right? Or you can have all the cash in the world, but you've got a credit card bill equally as high. You're navigating that. And reputation management is more than important. It's critical, equally as important as your clinical capabilities and your operational metrics and being able to show up to a fire or an ambulance or call a call or an EMS call wherever, being able to show up and do that job on time. What I've found is that's just the beginning. If you're not sharing that story, people don't know about it. How can they celebrate it? How can they share in that passion for your organization? Ultimately, isn't that the goal, to have a community that supports you so that when and if you get in a bind, whether that's somebody looking to come in and make a non-competitive market competitive, or bringing in a remodeling or restructuring or budget cuts. I mean, that's the most simple, that you've already planted those seeds. And so in my experience, it doesn't feel as salesy, right? People hate sales in healthcare.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's nauseating. And ultimately what you're doing is you're building trust. And so in that same philosophy goes down into individual leadership development. When you're sitting in an ambulance, and it's yourself and your partner, we've all had great partners that we felt like they're our brother and sister, and we've, at 3 o'clock in the morning, driving along an empty road, laughing your head off at a stoplight. It's just, we've all had those great relationships. And then we've also had people rove in that within 10 minutes, you have no trust, and it's the longest shift of your life. And the good leaders, in my mind, the people that I role model behavior or I look to for guidance, understand that trust that's developed. But that's not entitlement. That is not, just because you have the leader title, and that's very cliche to say, it doesn't mean it's an entitlement. I may be the chief of the department. However, I look up to some of the firefighters in my department because they're my leaders. And it's getting over that entitlement. You break down that entitlement by earning trust. And that is something you have to do constantly every day. And the successful leaders are the ones that are willing to invest the time to build that equity amongst their members and amongst the community and amongst everybody they impact. Because that's what we're doing from a macro standpoint, from a community-wide standpoint, and then also from that individual component. Right? Leadership is it's an assigned title that is given from people that choose to title you a leader. I don't believe that I can title myself a leader of a department or really of anything, because I have to wait for people to buy in and earn that trust and in essence, follow my direction or role model.
Sure.
So it all is interwoven from an individual leadership perspective into a community-wide thing. It's all about establishing and building and strengthening relationships and being driven for more, because It doesn't end. Just because I did a great story 10 years ago doesn't mean that equity is still in the bank. Right.
Well, and two, I mean, there are, in a lot of geographies, there's a lot of people who are in the industry for 20, 30 years. I mean, you yourself you've been in EMS and fire for 17, is that right?
17, 18, yeah.
17, 18 years. There's a lot of people who have been around for a long time. I think it's an interesting dynamic, because on one hand, you've got the people, I call them the always never people, who, well, we did this, it's not going to work. And they're generally it's not going to work people.
Yeah.
We did this already. And you dive in and go, well, when? And it was, 6 years ago, and it was under different leadership in a different context. And so I think important to remember exactly what you're saying. That social equity, that bank account changes terms every year, every 6 months, every month. You have other things going on in your community that affect that bank account, right? And so if you have something like coronavirus come in, and now you're dropping 20% of transports, 30%, 40% of transports in some places in the country, and you're up against a hard conversation, it's what's relevant. I mean, so I would be interested to know, Brad, have you ever been, followed your own advice, been vulnerable, put yourself out there, and it backfired on you?
Oh, I laugh. It's almost like every day. But no, and that's part of what I do in part of my philosophy is I am extremely open. And for instance, this new COVID environment, we've gone out on a few type 1 fires this season. And traditionally I have 50 public information officers working in my section, and it's face-to-face communications, it's building relationships, it's going out in the communities that are evacuated or impacted. And we have a very robust playbook based on the last 40 years of type 1 incidents that have occurred, and you learn and you train. And I'm fortunate to work on the type 1 incident management team that manage ground zero. So I'm working with some incredible mentors that have vast amounts of experience. However, this year there's 3 people sitting in our PIO shop, and we're working in a completely virtual environment where I have public information officers that are qualified from New Hampshire to Alaska. And now I'm dealing with 30 people in the virtual environment. And the first 2 fires, I made a lot of missteps because I wasn't clarifying exact direction to my staff. I wasn't checking in with my staff enough to understand what they were going through because I was wrapped up in my own world of trying to figure out what right looks like in this new environment.
Mm-hmm.
And little things like I was having, one-on-ones with some of my leadership, and they're like, "Hey, Brad, I just want to let you know, like, we're at home living our lives. Like, I am a single mother with 2 children I have to feed, and we have basketball practice that isn't canceled, and I have these incredible asks because I'm dealing with communities that are evacuated and fires that are burning, and yet I didn't touch that human aspect." And I'm very open about that. And we've done a lot of lessons learned with some of the national PIO groups to say, hey, here's where I failed. But I guess let me highlight one of my biggest, in essence, failures as a leader and as a public information officer. And in 2013, my team was assigned to the Yarnell Hill fire, unfortunate fire that took the lives of 19 of the Granite Mountain hotshots, and many of them were my close friends. And so it was incredibly difficult fire to take. And it was pretty quick that the fire itself was only about 900 acres, and it was merely secondary to the fact that we now had to deal with the messaging and take care of, in essence, the legacies of these 19 firefighters, handling their family messaging and the community and all the complications that everybody can kind of imagine goes with that. Mm-hmm. Well, in my shop, I had various amounts of experience, and we had a new firefighter. She was a PIO as well, and she came into the shop. This was her first wildland fire, which is just gut-wrenching to begin with. Mm-hmm. And I assigned her a task, and it was a task that we were building a memorial board. And she had a graphic arts background. She had to format the board. Mm-hmm. And part of that was pictures and biographies. And so for 8 days, she worked on pictures and biographies. Well, critical incident stress debriefings and critical incident stress teams were deployed for us in the incident command. And it took about 8 days for us to really buy into the fact that we needed it. So on the 9th morning, I shut down my shop, had our CISM team come in and just do a quick round the horn debrief. And there was tears and emotions and everything that needed to happen. But when it got to her turn, she started to articulate that she hadn't been sleeping in a few days, and that she spent her whole day reading the biographies of the 19 men that died. And it was devastating. And I still get choked up, but yeah. From a leadership component, I was so focused on task and outcome. And I was so focused on what we had to do to protect the families and what we had to do to protect the firefighters and what we had to do to make sure messaging was not good, but perfect, because the world was watching what was going on, and they wanted to know all these things, very complicated, that I was assigning tasks and neglecting the human component of it. And that was life-changing for me. Mm-hmm. And that is something I've taken away from that incident as not only a leader, but a PIO and a dad, is I have to understand everything that I'm asking somebody to do. There's a human side to that. Mm-hmm. It's not just graphic design for memorial board. It's, are you able to do this? And is it necessary you're the only one that has to do this? And so I've had a much more retrospective approach to leadership. And it's not barking orders and managing, but it's take a step back. What are you tasking your people to do, and how's that being done? And that has transcended to how I performed as a captain, as a battalion chief, as a deputy, and now my role as an assistant chief. Up and down the chain is making a much harder look at the human side of what we're doing.
That's incredible. And thank you for sharing that story. And I'm sorry for your loss. I know it's never easy to lose people close to you. It's never easy as a department, and being a public information officer and having to manage the message around that being personal, I'm sure was difficult. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, how do you, so when you said, okay, I messed this up, right? I kind of forgot. I got so focused here on this message and this kind of narrow, blinders. And I think it's no real fault. It's also a human thing on your side that I was so focused on the task because I didn't want to dive into the emotions. I'm sure there was an element of that, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to talk about it. And the second you recognize that in somebody else, it opens the floodgates. How did you manage that when you had that aha moment to say, oh my goodness, I hear you, I see you? How did you communicate that to her?
So I apologized and we talked. So I spend time and what I call marinate in situations to work through issues. And so on an incident command post on fires, I'm like, hey, let's go for a walk. And we hugged and cried and talked about it. And I explained to her that I failed her, but I won't do that again. And we created a great workaround that, the last couple of days of the fire, she did really well. She got out of that project, found value in some of the other things. But most importantly, what I do is I share. I'm an open book. And the more I can share, I want to make sure that people that are willing to listen, I'm not a pro, I'm not an expert, I'm not the gold standard for anything. I'm a student learning this craft. And if I can teach the ways that I have let these lessons occur in my life, and that if the next time there's an incident like that, I'm an open book, and I try to do that. And I spoke for the next year or so after that to various PIO groups, articulating the HR component. So what you have to do to run an PIO shop, because nobody teaches you that. And then, the incidents that occurred since, it's really rewarding. Unfortunately, yesterday afternoon, there was a fatality on a fire, the Poli's fire in central Arizona. So a light helicopter went down and the pilot unfortunately did not survive the fatality. And so that is something in our world that we deal with a lot. However, there's 2 Type 1 teams in the Southwest. Our sister team is managing that incident right now. And, I was on the phone with them yesterday, and my partner is go up today. She arrived there last night to help them get through that. But my students and the people I work with have heard these stories over the years, and we reach out and we try to support them and, guide them through these incidents. And the reward for me is when I see somebody that I've worked with and trained with, and they're not repeating the same mistakes that I have. That's to me, that is a huge success. And nobody has to know other than me and that person. And that's kind of the secret squirrel side of I love it. But that's why I'm so open. That's why I share. And that's why you invest your time, and you have to tuck your ego aside, and who cares? People are more willing to listen to you if you're willing to be open with them.
That's the truth. And I think also testament to, the business side of the house, succession planning. When you're serving in a mentor capacity, and when you moved into this role, you had to backfill your position. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So did you already, having kind of mentored people and, engaged in your agency with multiple people, did you already kind of have people slated out? Did they know that you thought they were right for the role? What was that process like?
So I pulled my deputy chief in the office on his first day. I sat him down. I go, hey, Bollinger, you like to talk. You're going to be our PIO. It was just like little victories in life, right? And
Yeah.
he's like, what? And I go, well, I forgot to mention this, but yeah, the deputy over community services is now going to be the new PIO. And he's like, yeah, deer in the headlights. He knew it was coming because there was rumors about it. But that's the way I broke him the news. And, I think humor is part of my leadership style as well, too. So, it is one of those things that he understood, and the people that are coming in these positions now understand my intent. And, I have a training philosophy that I say, I want you to go out and develop your own style. I want you to be the trapeze artist, and I'm your safety net. I have a very vast Rolodex of experience to pull from, the type 1 incident management team dealing with evacuations and mass fatalities and memorial services and all these complex incidents, to spending, hours on a street corner in front of, the media. And so I can pretty much get us out of a lot of trouble. However, I want to learn how you do it, and I want you to develop your style. If I give you everything, it's not going to help you at all. You need to stumble. We need to make corrections. Don't worry about reputation or brand management, because I'm not going to put you in a scenario that things are going to go that drastic. And you know what? If you're live with CNN and you make a misstep, we'll talk about it. We'll learn from it. It's going to happen.
Right.
And I try to instill confidence in that way, that a true mentor isn't a problem solver. It's a guide. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to become a helicopter parent or a lawnmower parent, which is the latest one I just heard.
I don't know that one. What's a lawnmower parent?
They remove all the obstacles from their children's path, so they just plow through everything. I don't know. I just heard that. But it's not beneficial to anybody. And so I don't want Brad 2. I want Chris Bollinger, Public Information Officer for the City of Maricopa Fire Medical Departments, to do his thing.
Yeah. So. Yeah, no, it's incredible. And obviously you've done an incredible job of not only managing the brand, but paving your own career path and finding that kind of atypical career path. I think just before I let you go, because I'm so appreciative of your time, I think you have an interesting little tidbit on your education side. So this was not your original plan for your career.
So John Lennon said, life's what happens while you're making plans. So I was sitting in Boston, applying for law schools, took the LSAT, getting ready to go. And unfortunately, 9/11 happened. And my sister was living in Lower Manhattan at the time. I lost friends during 9/11, one of which, was on an aircraft. And it was a pivotal moment in my life, just like tens of millions of other people, where I was weighing in the balance. Do I spend the next 3 years of my life in a library reading old case law? And then do I make a difference in people's lives? Do I dedicate my skill set to the community? And I went to boarding school in high school, and part of that boarding school, they had a volunteer fire department that was working in the city. And if you're 18 years old, you could become an EMT and help out on those calls. Well, I played sports in school. I never was afforded the time to do that, but it always was inside of me. I thought they were the coolest. Forget the lacrosse players and the soccer players. I'm like, that's cool. That's really cool. And it seems fun, and the camaraderie. And so in 2002, my folks moved to Arizona. I followed suit, and I enrolled in a EMT class in a community college. And my instructor was from the Phoenix Fire Department. And part of our class, we had to do a ride along on fire truck. I was a kid in a candy store. I still am around fire trucks and ambulances and all that stuff. And so
you're not alone either.
No, it's great. Yeah. And so I made a pivot, and that's what drove me into becoming an EMT and a paramedic, and getting into the community services, public safety world. And then from there, it's been one thing after another. It's an opportunity, it's training, it's keeping my head down and grinding when there's no opportunities in sight. I'm a member of a type 1 incident management team now, not because of any other reason. I had an opportunity. I showed up on a fire on a brush truck as a firefighter. They were short-staffed in the PIO shop. I had the task book open. They opened the door, and all of the years of training and experience and street corner interviews and classes and education across the country gave me the skill set to succeed and keep me on the other side of that threshold. And then, we had the Wallow fire in 2011. It burned 540,000 acres. It was the size of Rhode Island. And just the volume and the pressure of that fire was really my test on, could I function at that level on the team? And we had a few complicated fires after that. And then the team gave me the opportunity to be a rostered member with them. And it was a very full circle moment for me, because it was the team that managed Ground Zero. And part of the relationship they built on that day is we still train members of the FDNY. So we have members that come out and train with our incident management team. You know, they say that's one of the blessings of 9/11 is introduction of ICS, Incident Command System, and IMT. They now have a great incident management team, and it kept me connected with some of my East Coasters. And it's it. It's just, at the end of the day, and what I want to tell everybody is grind. Never give up on your education. Your degrees and your certifications aren't the end. They're just merely the beginning, because now you have them. It makes it that much harder to stay relevant. And we have to keep a beginner's mindset, because if we fall on our laurels, if we, you know, consider ourselves these experts and we lose that beginner's mindset of the thirst of knowledge, we're going to be obsolete, because your peers and your competitors and your coworkers and community, they're not hanging their hat on yesterday's news. So in order to be in the front, and when opportunities present themselves, prepare yourself for that moment, because you never know when it's going to come. And I'm a living example of that.
That is incredible advice, and I think very clear, kind of interesting to me, and maybe the fire folks are shaking their head going, Brett, that's very typical, but you're talking about the start of your career 18 years in. You just got promoted. I want to congratulate you, the youngest fire chief, you know, assistant fire chief in your region. I know that was a big thing for you. So it obviously goes to show that your hard work has paid off. And I am honored to know you. I am honored that you joined us today. I'm so glad to know that there's not just firefighters, but a community that's being taken care of. And from a message and a branding perspective, but it's clear that you care. And that's the kind of leadership that we need in the industry, in every industry. We need a world of people who remember that the world is full of people. So, I love that you're here. I really appreciate your time today. You've left us with a great couple tips and takeaways. Brad, if there's one quick thing people can do when they hang up this call or stop listening to our podcast today, what's one thing that you leave our audience with that they can do to be a better emergent leader today than they were yesterday?
Have a conversation with people below you in your chain of command. And if you're just starting off, have a very good conversation with who you emulate as a leader, and make it a real conversation, and get to know people and start building that leadership equity that you need to be successful in your environment.
I love that. Brad, thanks again for your time, guys. Thank you for listening.